Good evening. Welcome to the holiday edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. With me, my colleague, Clayton Jones.
Good evening.
And we're here tonight to close out the old year and get ready for the new. One thing, we have set our elves out to do a little comparative shopping, and we have here some hemp seed granola. Do you know where they found this, Clayton?
I think he said he found that at Kroger, but I found some last week at HEB also.
Okay. I know it was, a year and a half ago that hemp oil-based milk showed up on the shelves. Yes. So we're starting to find hemp-derived food products becoming, I guess you could say, more mainstream in the organic and health food market. It looks like we have a visitor that's dropped in tonight. So let's say hello to Sativa Claus.
Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas
to you, Sativa Claus.
My goodness, what a big bag you've got there.
Can you imagine Sativa Claus without a bag?
Well, at least we know how you get high up over the rooftops then.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Do you keep a list of who's naughty and nice?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I can tell you that there's a difference between those who are naughty and those who are nice.
Okay, and who do you think's been naughty this year?
Oh, well, there's always the perennial naughty boy, and those are the agents of the DEA. Pretty much hard to give them anything more than a lump of coal Christmas.
You know, I've been wondering about those boys. I haven't really seen much of the DEA lately. They seem to be laying low these days.
Out of sight and thankfully out of mind.
Maybe that means a change of policy.
Let's hope so.
Well, is there anyone you really think has been among the nice little boys and girls this year?
Well, Eric Holder, our Attorney General, is definitely going to be getting something nice in his Christmas stocking this year for deciding that finally the federal government will not harass sick people for taking their medicine.
That's right. They've said that they're going to abstain from prosecuting people who are in states with medical marijuana laws that are following those laws. And Clayton, I believe you found a story out of Michigan?
Yeah, up in the Upper Peninsula, there's an elderly woman that had brain cancer. She was on chemo and radiation, and she was recommended to use cannabis to deal with her symptoms. And the housing project where she lived is owned by the federal government, and they started eviction proceedings on her
for using
the medicine that was recommended.
Yeah.
And the Department of Justice has just come out and said, wait a minute, let's look into this a little further.
Yeah, well, of course, those federally funded housing projects in their leases have had a clause back to the Nixon days, actually, where any use of any illegal drug on the premises or by anyone living there would be grounds for the project to break the lease and evict the people. So this is one where you're really overturning 30 years of a pretty solid policy here.
Yes, but they've been evicting these people regularly.
Yeah, that's what I'm
saying. And now we have just gotten a step in there to say, hey, wait a minute, let's take a relook at what we're doing.
That sounds, as I say, that's changing a 40-year-old strong policy. Who else is on the list? Yeah.
Well, I think that considering the changes that are being considered at City Hall, perhaps Pat Lykos might be getting something more than a lump of coal in her stocking.
She has done some good things lately.
And of course, the big thing, I think, is to continue to support and give good presents in the stockings of all those people who are fighting the cause, risking prison to get medicine to those people who need it, who are sick, as well as those activists like yourselves who are trying to change the system within the legal boundaries that we are construing. After all, we are a nation of laws, and we need to change them.
Well, Sativa Claus, I would just nearly disagree with you there. When some men dressed up like Indians and broke onto the board of the ships and threw a bunch of tea overboard, they were not obeying the law. They were breaking the law. When some more men hid guns and stashed them away and then stood up and fired at the duly constituted army at Lexington and Concord in 1775, they were not obeying the law.
This is true.
When Henry David Thoreau went to jail for not paying his taxes because it was being used to enforce the fugitive slave laws, he was not obeying the law. When Rosa Parks rode on the wrong part of the Birmingham bus in 1955, she was not obeying the law.
This is true.
The history of America is make the law do what's right, not let the law force you into doing what's wrong.
Very true, very true.
So I'm not going to restrict my nice list to just those that say, oh, but the law tells me so and so. That might mean the law needs
It
changing.
might never get changed.
You know, the American public has already overwhelmingly said that these laws are wrong and they are antiquated and they do need to be changed.
What was that last Zogby poll you were telling me about on marijuana legalization?
Legalization was 80%?
Oh, that was on the medical. It was, I think
Yes.
you said 52%.
52%
On just outright legalizing
outright
and regulating.
legalization with 14% undecided what they should do.
Well, would you put Richard Lee and his referendum to legalize in California on your naughty or nice list?
Absolutely. Richard has been doing a wonderful job, and his stocking's going to be full to the brim this year.
You know, let's talk about Drug Policy Alliance. They've been doing a lot for us. And they're not an individual. They're a large group of people that are very well dedicated to changing the laws.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you went to their big convention.
I went to their big convention. I was on a conference call with them last week. What they're trying to organize is the whole West Coast going for legalization at the same time.
Well, I believe Oregon now has a legalization bill introduced in its legislature with multiple sponsors. So the West Coast may be going there faster than we think.
It's usually about 5 years ahead of the rest of the country, and let's hope so that they go and we all follow lead, because
Well,
after all, we're down here in Texas.
We're
it's
lagging way
only
behind
hot.
because it's been 15 years.
behind us.
Well, you know, it's always disturbed me. I'm one of these old 6th generation or more Texans. I've spent my whole life in this state, and my view has always been a Texan is someone that knows what's right and does it come hell or high water. And we seem to have had a bunch of people, especially in Austin for the past generation or so, that says, ooh, we can't change anything. We've got to stay with what's the old safe way of doing it. So surprisingly enough, in the 1950s, Walt Disney put some of the best Texas words ever in the mouth of his Davy Crockett when he said, be sure you're right and then go ahead.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And I think it's time that Texas remembers its history. And we sure broke a few Mexican laws back in 1836.
That's
it's time that we realize what's right and go ahead. So.
I agree.
And speaking of that, gentlemen, I have plans to cut and trim, and my list is still incomplete. So I'll let you continue with the rest of your show. I have to get off
on your rounds.
I would like you to bring me at least 2 ounces this Christmas.
Well, I would just,
good dank.
I would just enjoy the smell that wafts from that little pipe clenched tightly in your teeth, as the old song has it.
Absolutely.
So, thank you for stopping in to visit us, Sativa Claus. And all of you good little boys, if you sleep tight tonight, there's no telling what will happen. So as we wave goodbye, ere he drove out of sight, we'll take a break and see you in a few minutes.
Merry Christmas, and to all a high night.
It's time to play Name That Drug by its side effects. Shortness of breath, slow heartbeat, weight gain, fatigue, hypotension, dizziness may mask the symptoms of low blood sugar. Stopping therapy abruptly has led to chest pain and heart attacks. Time's up. Talk about dependence. The answer from GlaxoSmithKline, Coreg for hypertension, heart failure, and heart attacks.
This week in drug war history, December 11th, 1942, the Opium Poppy Control Act is enacted, making possession of the opium poppy plant or seeds illegal. December 12, 1995, Director Brown announces his resignation of head of the U.S. Office of National Drug Control Policy. December 14, 2001, President George W. Bush says, if you quit drugs, you join the fight against terrorism. December 9, 2002, the Canadian House of Commons Special Committee on Non-Medical Use of Drugs releases reports that call for safe injection sites, pilot heroin maintenance programs, decriminalization of cannabis, among other reforms. December 13, 2002, a disabled, deaf, wheelchair-bound British charity worker returns home after spending 2 years in a primitive Indian prison after being found guilty of trafficking drugs, even though it was a physical impossibility. December 13, 2004, Hungary's constitutional court restricts the use of diversion to drug treatment for some drug offenders. This is Steve Nolan for the Drug Truth Network.
Hi, I'm Ethan Nadelman, the founder and executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance. You're watching Drugs, Crimes, and Politics. Hope you enjoy it.
They had the smuggling under control. And we're back again. Our seasonal visitor has gone now, but perhaps if things work out right, he'll start appearing more often in everyone's future. So do you have anything else that's new that you want to talk about tonight, Clayton?
You know, there's a lot of good things happening in our country. The Bar Amendment was repealed.
Yeah.
If anybody doesn't know about the Bar Amendment, I believe the Bar Amendment went in 1998?
I believe it's older than that.
Older than that?
Yeah. What happened? The District of Columbia scheduled a referendum within the district on medical marijuana. And you know, the district is governed directly by Congress. And Bob Barr, the conservative Republican from, I believe, Georgia, rushed through a quick amendment to the D.C. Home Governance Act that prohibited them from using any governmental money whatsoever to count the votes on any such referendum or to conduct any more referenda along that line. And as a result, those ballot boxes have been sitting there for over 10 years now. But do you know what the most ironical thing about the repealing of the Barr Amendment was?
What's that?
Bob Barr has now switched sides.
Yes.
And he was one of the lobbyists that was fighting the hardest to get this repeal to take place. Now,
He was a congressman.
he was. As I say,
Was.
yeah.
Oh, speaking of that, being congressman and
Well,
everything.
before that, let me say one other thing. The way the law is, the D.C. City Council now can count those votes. They send the result to Congress, and unless Congress acts to overcome the result within 30 days, then that becomes law in the District of Columbia. So now D.C. will have medical marijuana unless Congress acts to stop it, both houses, within 30 days. Go ahead.
Great. I mean, everything's happening all around us. There's so much good happening. And then again, you get some of these, knucklehead companies like Chase Bank. Chase Bank was awarding $5 million to the top 100 nonprofit organizations that had, each person was given 20 votes.
Yeah.
And they could
This was
assign
through
those.
Facebook or MySpace,
Yes.
one of them, yeah.
And they were keeping tallies on all the votes. And MPP, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, was coming in right around in the middle.
Yeah.
And they decided, for suspense reasons, they took all the results off of the web. They didn't let anybody know what was happening for 2 days. And in 2 days' time, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, MPP, all fell right off of the chart.
Well,
They got no more votes and they got nothing.
and as I was saying earlier, that's to be expected. I may be cynical here, but this is why that if you see a poll by someone like Zogby or Pew or Gallup or Roper, it's pretty legitimate. But if you see something that's sponsored by any kind of commercial entity, remember, they're not interested in truth, they're interested in selling product. And if Chase Bank is afraid that looking like they're in favor of marijuana might prevent someone from taking out a loan from them, they're going to run away and hide. It's just like you're not going to see Ford advertising for General Motors. You're not going to see any other business. You're not going to see, for instance, Tag Heuer featuring Tiger Wood as a spokesman anymore, because they're just too afraid of making a possible customer mad. So,
But don't you think they're making more people angry that know the situation? And I mean, the
Who knows?
marijuana community, we're not the biggest, most powerful people about, but damn it, when things are right there and they just don't care what anybody says, I honestly believe that gives them more of a black eye than...
well, in that case, I would advise that anyone that is in a position to do so, feels that way, move your accounts to some other bank, borrow any money you're going to borrow from somewhere else, and more important, write that particular bank and tell them why you're doing it. Now, even more than politicians, businesses listen to people that complain.
Yes.
So remember, our strongest weapon, your strongest weapon, is your pen, your voice, or these days more and more your keyboard. So perhaps we should start a wall of shame somewhere, and this might be one company that goes on it pretty soon.
They could head the board. They could be the first one on there. And also, last Sunday in San Antonio, they found 2 tons or 2,000 pounds found in a semi underneath melons.
Okay.
That just goes to show you that our drug war is working. They have to wait till they get big loads that you smell them from 20, 30, 50 feet away.
No, that's not what it means. When they had the border closed down or thought they did, they were catching a pound or a half a pound that was being smuggled. When they start making arrests that involve a ton or as much as 10 tons, what that means is the traffickers are relaxed enough that they're willing to ship their product by the truckload, and they're not really worried about being busted. What it says is that border interdiction does not work. Of course, we knew that all the time anyway. But
it's, you know, the only way that they'll ever come to shut the border down when it comes to marijuana is by outright legalizing it, taxing it, regulating it, trying to control it, because what we have now is absolutely no control whatsoever.
No one in the history of the whole world has ever made a border that kept anything out, period. Mm-hmm. Now, the Chinese built the Great Wall of China to keep the Mongol hordes out. Pretty soon the Mongols conquered China. Jericho built walls around its whole city to keep the enemies out. All it took was one Israelite with a trumpet, and those walls went away. The Soviet Union not only had tight border walls, but they even engineered their videotape machines to require a special Soviet format so that they couldn't play European or American videotapes. That started two whole new industries. One, smuggling video cassette players that could play American tapes, and the other, an industry converting smuggled American tapes into the Soviet Union format. I mean, border controls do not and cannot work. They never have, they never will. And I don't care if you're trying to keep out drugs. I don't care if you're trying to keep out illegal immigrants. You just can't do it. So.
Well, Czechoslovakia seems like they found a problem to their marijuana.
Yeah, and it was funny. I've been saying, and it shows that you got to do your research carefully. I've been saying for over a year or so that marijuana was legal in Czechoslovakia. It seems that it had merely been decriminalized and the officials were ignoring it, but then what happened this month?
Well, their Supreme Court got a case, and they decided that every adult could have 5 plants, and it would kill the black market.
Yeah.
So they out and out went to kill the black market, and in order to do that, that was more important than having someone raising their own intoxicant.
Yeah. And I've been saying for some time about the mess in Mexico, that whole violent war going on in Mexico is a product of the American drug laws. Yes. Now, those cartels down there don't care anything at all about drugs. I mean, most of them don't use it. They don't care if you use it. They're in the business for money. We now send about $30 billion a year to Mexico for drugs. And $30 billion a year is worth fighting for. That's worth being in a war for, and it gives you enough money to buy military-grade weapons. But at least 90% of that money, maybe more, is not going to pay for the drugs, but to pay for the drug laws. If we got rid of the drug laws, marijuana might not become as cheap as broccoli, although it should, but it should at least be as cheap as sirloin steak. And if it were $1 or $2 an ounce instead of $400 an ounce, there's not anything left for the drug cartels in Mexico to fight over.
Now, I had a friend that just came back from California last week.
Yeah.
And he was buying his marijuana over the internet, and it was delivered for $130 for a half an ounce.
For a half an ounce?
For a half ounce. And this was in San Francisco.
Yeah. Oh, I was surprised there because what I had heard about a month ago was that the street dealers in Los Angeles had been cutting their prices by about 20% down to about $100 a quarter an ounce, simply because they had to do it to match the decreasing price through the medical dispensaries.
Well, prices are starting to fall out there on the West Coast.
Yeah, yeah. And part of it, if we look at Northern California, for instance, there are several counties where the marijuana growers have started coming out from under the covers and growing marijuana legitimately to supply the dispensaries.
Yes.
Is becoming the leading industry in those counties.
And the thing about that is they're getting paid.
Let's let him get it. Okay. Good evening. You're on the air with Drug Crime and Politics.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I just want to make a point that you were making, but reiterate it, that the people who are making a living of the drugs the world is more the legitimate people like lawyers, judges, the system, the sheriffs, the people who are at the DEA. They're the people who would like to perpetuate more than anybody else. I was a foreman of the grand jury in Houston, downtown, a few years ago, and it was disgusting to see that about 80% of all the convictions were drug-related, and I mean pathetically drug-related. I mean, for little roaches in a car that some police would find, they would try to indict people, and they had to spend all their savings accounts in order to hire some shyster lawyer to represent them. It was really absolutely awful. Now, you're right. I mean, like if they legalize everything, there'll be no incentive for the cartels to even exist. It's like the liquor, the Prohibition era was the same thing. People were killing each other. And if anybody wants to kill themselves today, they can go ahead and go to a liquor store and buy enough liquor to just like drink all weekend long, and they're going to be dead by the end of the weekend. So there's no excuses. It's just completely ridiculous. And I don't understand why some people in the government don't realize the futility of all of this, and they're spending more money all the time. And of course, the attorneys would love for it to continue, especially the criminal lawyers and the judges and the jailers, and it's just absolutely pathetic what we see in the system.
Thank you.
So anyway.
It's always nice to hear the voice of experience like that. It's great. I do know that in California, the Prison Guards Union is very active, and they have been ever since the first medical marijuana referendum. They have been one of the strongest political opponents to all of the weakening of the drug laws that's taken place. So we need to take another break, and we'll come back.
Began seeing women come into Rikers Island in 1990. And these were women who were arrested at JFK for transporting drugs. And what they were asked to do was to go before a judge and to plea bargain. That if they pleaded guilty, even though these women may have been coerced into bringing drugs, or even if they were fooled into bringing drugs, they still were expected to plead guilty to that offense, which meant that if a woman was carrying 2 ounces of drugs with the intent to sell, that woman would get a mandatory 15 to 25 years to life in prison. If she was simply accused of carrying drugs as low as 4 ounces, that woman also would get a mandatory 15 to 25 years to life in prison upon conviction. If she was willing to plea bargain, that means that she could go to the courts and say, yes, she was guilty, even though she wasn't. She would then have to go before a judge, swear on a Bible to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and then she was expected to lie. She was expected to say that these drugs were brought in knowingly and for profit. And so you have a judicial system then that condones lying. I felt right from the very beginning that this was undermining, these laws were undermining our system.
We're back with Drugs, Crime, and Politics. Remember, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, you can call us. If you're watching on streaming video or watching it delayed over YouTube, we have an email address where you can get in touch with me, and I will respond to your email, and we may use your comment or question on the next show. Our last caller brought up, and this is the old lawyer question that you always ask, which is, cui bono? Who profits? Who benefits from something? That caller was someone who had been a foreman of a grand jury in Harris County, and he was making the claim that the police, the jailers, the lawyers showed a profit by keeping drugs against the law. You know, there's a lot to that, and in more ways than I think he was talking about. Right now, if you listen to what's going on with Houston city government, one of the worrisome problems that everyone's trying to deal with is we don't have enough police on the streets to effectively do patrol work. But we need to ask the question, how many of those people that we do have are wasting their time piddling around with minor drug possession cases instead of going after the bad guys? We have been looking for years at claims that we need to be building bigger and more jails, which means hiring more jailers. How many people are in that jail that shouldn't be there, that are there for simple drug possession charges? Now,
you know, the jails don't care. The jails are a business, and they just want to see that their facilities are full. That's how they make money.
You know, that's the question that I always ask was, did anyone ever see an empty jail cell? Well, surprisingly enough, that's happening. The state of Texas, through various programs, has actually reduced its prison population by, I think it's something like 20,000 or so over the past 3 or 4 years. It's down to around 150,000 now for the state, way more than it should be. If you look at the county jail, if we took all of the people that are in the jail either serving sentences for simple drug possession, who are there awaiting trial on drug possession charges because they couldn't make bail, or who've simply been arrested on drug possession charges and are waiting until their arraignment so they can have bail set, as well as all of those that are there for some sort of drug dependency problem as part of the mental health population of the jail. I still think that we could probably get rid of all of the jail overcrowding just by getting rid of the people that are in it for simple drug possession. Yeah, the people that build prisons, the people that sell food to the jails and prisons, the people that sell sheets and towels to the jails and prisons, and the jailers that draw salaries for working in the jail. Yeah, they all have a vested interest in keeping them open. Taxpayers who are trying to fund the city and the county and the state operations and who see the impossibility of meeting the obligations with reasonable taxes, they don't have an interest in keeping the jails full. The voters' interest is in getting that jail as empty as it can be, consistent with the demands for public safety. No one probably should be in any jail or prison unless there's a substantial likelihood that he's going to hurt someone.
If we don't need to be protected from them, they don't need to be in jail.
And you know, up until the early 1800s, people weren't sent to jail for punishment. They were kept in jail to make sure they would show up for trial. But punishment was either corporal punishment like whippings or brandings. They were humiliation punishments like being put in the stocks or the pillory, or in Hester's case, wearing the scarlet A. Britain exported a lot of prisoners to the colonies in places like Georgia and Australia. But it was only in about 1810 or so in Philadelphia that the first penitentiary was created. And Dr. Benjamin Rusk was largely responsible. And his idea was that this was a place in which people would be put to do penance, to think about how they had done things wrong, and to change their mind and become good people. And it was only after that that the idea of prison as punishment came along. And I would go so far as to say it really hasn't worked. I'm not sure I ever saw anyone come out of prison a better person than when they went in.
No. And the abuse that people have to endure in prison?
A few years ago, the statistics in Texas were that over 40% of the inmates in the Texas prison were HIV positive. Over 30% had hepatitis C. These were primarily infections that were picked up in prison, and that anyone, even if they merely spent overnight in a local lockup awaiting bail being set, had a substantial likelihood of being raped while they were in prison. Now, that's not really a respectable kind of punishment.
But, you know, it seems like our criminal justice system has figured that's a part of being in prison.
Something that I've said for a long time is that people are sent to prison to be as punishment. They're not sent to prison to be punished. Mm-hmm. The punishment is loss of liberty. Now, I also think as human beings, once we become responsible for the well-being of anyone, and I don't care whether it's a dog that you keep in your house, whether it's a child that you're raising that's too young to care for themselves, whether it's someone sick that you're caring for, or whether it's someone you've locked up in a cage so that they don't have the ability to take care of themselves, then you have the responsibility to treat them humanely and to treat them well. Which means that if you put someone in a prison, you have assumed the responsibility to make sure that they are decently fed, decently clothed, decently housed, given adequate medical treatment, and are kept safe from predators. I mean, that's just the basics of things. And it's not because they're good or bad, it's because we want to be good human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And gee, I'm kind of getting off track here again, but.
Well, there's another good story over in Israel. Unfortunately, there's a 14-year-old girl over there that had cancer, and the government, the Israeli government, approved for her to use cannabis because of her chemotherapy and cancer.
Yeah.
Now, there's something a government's done well.
Yeah, the Israeli government has been quite a bit ahead of ours on the medical use of cannabis. It goes back at least 20 years that the Israeli army started working with cannabis as both a cure for and a prevention of post-traumatic stress disorder in combat situations. So one of the things they found out is that after soldiers came back from a combat mission, a little cannabis as a stress reliever that night could help prevent things from developing into worse situations later on, as well as using it later in treating post-traumatic stress syndrome when it developed.
Well, I mean, here's a girl that's not even post-traumatic syndrome.
Yeah.
She's got cancer, she's dying.
Yeah.
And the government just says, you need to use it.
Actually, if we look, and we have to pick on California because they've developed much more than any of the other states. So there are quite a few underage medical marijuana patients in California.
Oh, yes.
There it takes a recommendation from the doctor and approval by the custodial parents or guardians. But with double approval, there's nothing wrong with using it. And as I believe in some instances, it's been kids as young as single digits, 8 or 9,
Yes.
in that area.
I can remember a story. Some young man was a part of that woman's dispensary up there in San Jose.
Yeah.
And he was ready to be taken away from his parents. They considered him antisocial. Everything that could be wrong with him socially was. And they had an extreme behavior problem. And they started giving him cannabis. He was eating it, not smoking it.
Yeah.
And they, within a 3-month period, he's gone from the most problem child in the classroom to being the #1 child in it.
Okay. Several people have suggested, and I'm not aware of any formal studies yet, that in many instances for attention spectrum disorders, cannabis is more effective than the stimulants. Now, I not heard that it is in all cases. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, I just want to talk to the lawyer.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to say Merry Christmas, everybody. Everybody's listening.
Oh, Merry Christmas to you.
Okay, and to the, I think you're the lawyer?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I had a case one time where I was arrested for marijuana. Right. And supposing they legalized marijuana, would the conviction come up my record, or would it stay there for the rest of my life?
Okay. That's a good question. And chances are, what he asked was that he was arrested. Hello, you're on the air. Hello, you're on the air with
Hey, sir.
Yes. Hello?
I got a question for you.
Okay.
What are you guys promoting like the use of drugs for I don't know, for like medical purposes? Is that what this is all about?
Okay, that's a rather broad question. Is it something else, or I'll try to answer it in a minute?
Okay.
Let me go back to the first question about the man that was asking.
Would he keep his record?
Would it still be on his record even if we change the law? That record would still be there. And some people would still think that if you broke the law then, knowing it was against the law then, that might still make them reluctant to hire you. It probably, I'm not even sure how it would count as an enhancement if you got arrested again. The real problem would be what's going to happen to all of the people that are in jail right now if the law is repealed, and we've heard all sorts of things.
Well, we have tremendous amount of people in jail, and they don't call it for marijuana. They call it testing dirty for a UA.
That's for probation or parole revocation.
Right, and we have people in jail for that.
Yeah, and but they're in jail. What their record will show is that they're there for robbery or burglary or whatever the main offense. You know, a well-written repeal law would have provisions in it to take care of what to do about previous convictions, what to do about people presently serving time. But I want to go to that second question of what are we doing here? I personally don't really promote or discourage the use of drugs. Or let's say don't promote or discourage the use of what's now called illegal drugs, because we all use drugs, whether it's aspirin or penicillin or a flu shot. My contention is that prohibition laws are, first, unenforceable, and second, destructive of society and should be gotten rid of. Yes, there are some people that have problems when they try to use some psychoactive drugs. We need to deal with those problems, but criminal laws are not the way to do it. Number two, the medical evidence that marijuana or cannabis, however you want to call it, has strong medicinal uses in many circumstances is now totally overwhelming. It's insane for our government not to allow those medical uses to go forward. Do I advocate everyone running out and sniffing cocaine? No. For one thing, that leads to a lot of bad personal consequences. Do I think that it's the evil demon thing that our government points it out to be? No, I don't think that either. But I don't promote or discourage the use of drugs. I do promote that the idea that whether or not to do so should be the responsible, informed choice of an adult. Now, Clayton, you might want to have a different view on this.
No, I actually see nothing wrong with using drugs in moderation. Yeah. People have done it all through time. It is against the law, but people do it.
And remember, when we're talking about intoxicating drugs,
right,
you have to include alcohol, tobacco, and believe it or not, caffeine,
sugar
in that list. And there's no rational chemical way to distinguish between caffeine and alcohol on the one hand, and marijuana and cocaine on the other. They keep telling me we've got to take another break again, so we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
I'm a journalist.
I'm a student.
I'm a teacher.
I'm a representative.
I have cancer.
The outdated laws of prohibition are more dangerous than the plant itself.
I lost my scholarship.
I was fired.
20 million arrests since 1965. This is getting ridiculous.
Our prisons are overcrowded with non-violent offenders.
We have the opportunity to change.
This is costing our country billions of dollars.
Making my family and I fight in a courtroom is difficult enough when I'm already fighting through chemotherapy.
There's no reason to be scared by tradition anymore.
We can stop this.
We can stop this.
We are the American people.
We can stop this.
And you have our support.
We're old,
young,
straight,
gay.
We're every race and nationality.
And we're not going to give up.
You can tax it.
You can regulate it.
Apply age restrictions.
You can create millions of new jobs.
We can save our economy.
President Obama?
It's time for legalization.
Legalization.
Yes.
We
can.
This has been a public service announcement.
We're back again. We're just about to ring in the holiday season and ring out 2009, and I guess we could get into all sorts of name calling about when the decade is over and when the next decade starts. I think it's much more psychological than it is mathematical, so that we lump the zeros together and we lump the onesies together and the twosies. So as far as I'm concerned, 09 ends one decade and 10 starts the next. So
Amen.
I'm willing to say we're rolling over the decade in another week or so. And when we come back after the first of the year, I may have a list of New Year's resolutions to propose to you. But I think that basically from what has been happening the past year, we can go to bed tomorrow night with visions of sugar plums dancing in our heads. That it's really been a pretty good year for reforming and making the drug laws more reasonable, more effective, and more in line with what they should be. Politicians may still be yelling and screaming and calling each other names in Washington.
But, you know, it seems like that with the change of the administrations, the attitudes of Washington and our officials have kind of changed.
Well, you know, I think that's really true. The two big changes I have seen has first in the Attorney General's office. Not only is there the abstention policy on state medical marijuana laws, it's much an overall thing of moving drug law enforcement in general to the back burner, going much lower key on it. And since the Attorney General is the boss of the DEA, among other organizations, they've been much less obstreperous lately than they've been in the past. I think the current head of ONDCP, the drug czar, with his announcement that the war against drugs is over, has also been taking a much lower key approach and quietening things down. I really think that, frankly, to be honest about it, I think this current administration kind of hopes that the drug war would just dry up and go away and they wouldn't have to deal with it. I don't think it's one of their issues.
No, they've come out time and time again when we had the web line to the White House, and they've just passed off the drug.
Yeah. And you know, I really think that to some extent Congress is taking that. We have a caller. We've only got a minute or two, so we'd like for you to make it quick, but do you have a question or comment?
Okay. Yes, sir. You know, one more thing. I called a while ago. I just want to know, like in the future, Which way do you see the direction going for us, with like legalizing marijuana? I don't smoke no more, but which direction, like maybe 10 years from now, you think it'll be legal or not?
Okay, 10 years from now, I think in a year or two, when you go to a rock concert, you'll be able to buy a joint and light up. I think you'll be able to go into
I don't know about
a herbal
buying right up.
supplement shop and buy an ounce or a half an ounce. So
what it's going to take to change it to that is if, like this person that just called in here, would take the time to sit down and write longhand to his state representative, to his state senator, and tell them exactly the way he feels about the drug laws, that they do need to be changed, that they are bad, that that is how we're going to get them changed.
And to his congressman and both state senators. And Clayton's right here. Write it out in longhand on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope with a stamp. Believe it or not, that makes much more difference to a politician than an email or even a phone call. And as far as tweeting them is concerned, most politicians still think twittering is something little birds do. So they're among the technologically challenged. They love real handwritten mail.
Yes,
and it also makes a big stack on their desk when they start figuring how to vote. So the year's over, a new year's about to start. We have a new city government coming in Houston. So fire up those writing machines, let your politicians know how you feel, and let's welcome in the new year with a new resolve. And happy holidays to all of you from not only Clayton and me, but all of the people here behind the camera and all of the members of the Drug Policy Forum of Texas that keep us on the air and who help keep the process rolling. And may you have a good holiday as well.
That's about it. That's a good thing to think about.
Okay. And
that 2 minutes has been up there for about 5 now.
Yeah. And I guess it would be time to wish some of you a green Christmas. And now I think we're seeing the credits.
Yes. We have these private prisons that have now hired lobbyists to go get minimum mandatory review.
I began to understand that the 17 or the 19-year-old kid I had in the backseat of my police car was not a criminal at all.
Remove the profit motive. If you remove the profit motive, you can do away with almost all these problems. And how do you do that? Simple. The end prohibition, which can only mean one thing. Legalize drugs. Legalize all drugs.
If we really want to improve our urban neighborhoods, the most important thing that we could do, the single most important thing that we could do, is end the war on drugs.